Welcome to Quantumly Kinky with Dr. Veda, where we talk about sex, Eastern medicine, and character development for the multidimensional you. Episode 57. What Existential Kink Taught Me About Shadow, Desire, and Being Human. Welcome back to Quantumly Kinky, where modern sexuality meets ancient medicine, and every episode helps you to rewire your body for more pleasure, power, presence, and turn on. I am your host, Dr. Veda, and I wasn't necessarily planning to record this episode. In fact, I kept putting it down because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't speaking from shock. And I want to speak from reverence. Many of you have heard that Carolyn Elliott, the author of Existential Kink, died last week. Her team has shared that her death was by suicide. And before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge something I think is incredibly important. None of us knows what it felt like to be Carolyn. We don't know the landscape of another person's inner world. We don't know what conversations that she was having with herself. And we certainly don't know what pain she carried, what hope she carried, or what happened in the quiet moments when no one else was there. There is a sacred mystery to every human life. And I think one of the greatest acts of respect that we can offer is allowing that mystery to remain. But what I do know is this. 6 years ago, I picked up her book, and it permanently changed the way that I look at myself, my patients, my relationships, and my work. Not because it gave me answers, but because it gave me better questions. At the time, I had recently gone through a divorce, and everything I thought I knew about myself was being rearranged. My identity, my relationships, my spirituality, the way I understood healing. And James and I then read Existential Kink together, and I remember feeling simultaneously fascinated and deeply irritated. Have you ever read a book that feels like it's reading you? Because that was this for me. I had already spent years immersed in Taoism, Eastern medicine, psychology, sexuality, and energy medicine. I could explain trauma. I could explain nervous system regulation. I could explain attachment theory, and I could find meaning in almost everything. And somewhere underneath all of that understanding, I realized that there were still patterns I couldn't explain. The same emotional themes, the same relationship dynamics, the same moments where I would think, how did I end up here again? And there was this quiet part of me that knew I was still standing outside the deepest truth. I didn't feel like I was lying to myself. I just simply wasn't seeing all of myself. And that is the gift that shadow work has always offered. Not more shame, but more honesty. I've always been fascinated by the shadow, by paradox, by the places where two seemingly opposite things can both be true. As someone who identifies as kinky, and not only sexually, but philosophically, I have always loved exploring the edges of reality. What happens if we stop taking every thought literally? What happens if we stop assuming our first interpretation is the only interpretation? What happens if curiosity becomes more important than certainty? Those questions have shaped my life, and far more than certainty ever has. And that's what Existential Kink invited me into. It invited me to play. That that word matters, play, because I think somewhere along the way, many of us began believing that healing has to be fucking heavy, that transformation has to hurt, that growth only counts if it feels difficult. Yet, when you study Taoism, when you study the great mystics, when you study Carl Jung and alchemists, or even the archetype of the magician, you begin noticing something. They were not trying to dominate reality. They were entering into relationship with it. They experimented. They observed. They stayed curious. They understood that consciousness is participatory. Life isn't simply happening around us. We are constantly dancing with it. And for me, existential kink belongs in that lineage. And of course, I don't believe that every idea in the book is objectively true, but every worthwhile philosophy should make us more curious, not more certain. And one question from that book changed my life. Here's the question. What if some unconscious part of me has become devoted to repeating a familiar emotional experience? Let me say it again. What if some unconscious part of me has become devoted to repeating a familiar emotional experience? I want you to notice what I didn't say. I didn't say we choose our trauma. I didn't say suffering is deserved or injustice isn't real. I said something much quieter. What if my subconscious has become incredibly skilled at recreating what feels familiar? That's the question that landed in my body, just like acupuncture does. It didn't give me certainty, but it gave me somewhere new to look. Maybe I wasn't devoted to being exhausted. Maybe I was devoted to being needed. Maybe I wasn't devoted to conflict. Maybe I was devoted to proving that I could keep love. Maybe I wasn't devoted to disappointment. Maybe I had simply practiced disappointment long enough that my nervous system recognized it before it recognized peace. That is a radically different conversation. And honestly, a much more playful one. Because if patterns are learned, well, perhaps they can also become unlearned, not by force, not through self-criticism, but through relationship, through a new relationship. And this has become one of the foundations of my work. Every week in my clinic, I meet people who believe they have one problem. Low libido, my hormones are off, burnout, anxiety, fertility struggles, perimenopause. And yes, sometimes those are absolutely the places that we begin. But I'm an Eastern medicine doctor, and I care deeply about physiology, about blood, about chi, about hormones, sleep, digestion, the nervous system. The body matters. It always will. But over 15 years of sitting with people, I've also become fascinated by another question. What pattern has this body become loyal to? Not because the body is wrong, but because the body is brilliant. The body protects, it adapts, it repeats what has helped us survive in the past. Our nervous system doesn't organize around happiness, it organizes around familiarity. That single realization changed the way I practice medicine. I stopped asking only, okay, how do we eliminate this symptom? And I became equally interested in asking, What is this symptom protecting? What emotional climate has become familiar for this person? And what identity has the body organized itself around? Every pattern once served a purpose, and the work is not to make war with this. The work is to thank it for getting you here, and then to gently ask whether it's still the reality that you want to keep creating. Let's take a deep breath together. So today, I simply want to say thank you. Thank you to Carolyn Elliott. Thank you for writing something that deeply challenged me. Thank you for taking Carl Jung out of the therapy room and placing him into ordinary life. And thank you for helping so many of us become a little more honest with ourselves. I know that your work continues in every conversation that it sparked, in every pattern that someone finally recognized, in every relationship that was transformed by existential kink from deeper self-awareness, and in every practitioner who now asks one more curious question before trying to fix a symptom. I think that's her legacy. And as for me, I'll definitely continue asking the uncomfortable questions. I'll continue exploring my shadow with curiosity instead of fear, and I'll continue believing that every hidden part of us is asking to be brought into relationship. Because when we stop making war with ourselves, that's when our life can begin to turn us on. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Quantumly Kinky with Dr. Veda. Until next time, stay turned on.